Tarren Veldt was a man who lived two lives. By day, a wealthy philanthropist adored by the city, and by night, a shadow lurking behind a deadly secret. Liona Crest, his trusted mistress, had stumbled upon the truth that would cost her everything. When she vanished without a trace, no one could have imagined the chilling darkness hidden beneath Tarren's polished facade, until the nightmare began to unravel. Tarren Veldt was the kind of man who turned heads without trying. At 54, he had sao, the kind of wealth that bought silence, respect, and attention. He lived in a glass-walled penthouse that overlooked the city of Atlanta, surrounded by designer furniture and rare art. In public, he was known as a charitable entrepreneur, a man who donated heavily to cancer research and children's hospitals. He spoke softly at galas, shook hands with politicians, and posed for magazines as the face of modern philanthropy. But no one really knew him, not the real him. Behind the dazzling smile and crisp suits, Tarren carried secrets he had kept hidden for decades. He preferred things in control, neat and polished. That's how he ran his business and his personal life. He never married again after his wife allegedly died in a car crash 15 years ago. That story was one of many he carefully constructed. He often described himself as a lonely man who had survived tragedy. That image attracted sympathy, and young women who were drawn to the security he offered. One of those women was Liona Crest, a 27-year-old with big dreams and limited options. Liona had come to Atlanta to become an interior designer. She worked part-time at a small showroom and did freelance jobs wherever she could. But the reality of rent, bills, and unstable gigs wore her down. That's when she met Tarren at an invitation-only networking party in Buckhead. He was charming, attentive, and made her feel seen. He told her he admired her ambition, said she reminded him of someone he used to know, and asked if she had a mentor. Within weeks, he was paying for her rent, bought her a new car, and even covered the costs of her online certification courses. To the outside world, she looked like she had finally made it. Her Instagram was filled with photos of vacations, brunches, and designer bags. She always captioned them with motivational quotes, but none of them mentioned Tarren. That was one of his rules. He didn't want to be visible. He said it was about privacy. Liona believed him at first, but as time went on, she began to question things. Tarren would disappear for days with no explanation. He never introduced her to any of his friends or associates. He refused to be photographed with her and never invited her to his home during the day. Everything about him was perfectly measured and rehearsed. But sometimes, cracks would show, like when he snapped at her for asking about his past, or the one time she accidentally found an old ID in a drawer with a different name. Her curiosity slowly turned into suspicion. She started paying attention to details: his phone always locked, his computer encrypted, and a particular drawer in his home office that he told her never to open. One evening, while he was in the shower, she picked the lock. Inside, she found a box filled with old documents, birth certificates, passports, and photos of a woman she didn't recognize. Some were stained, others were dated as far back as the late 90s. The names didn't match his, and none of the IDs said Tarren Veldt. She took a few photos of the documents on her phone before quickly closing the drawer. From that moment, something in her shifted. She didn't say anything to him, but she started distancing herself. She told her friend Mara that she was planning to leave him. She didn't want to be another secret. What Liona didn't realize was that Tarren already knew she had seen the contents of that drawer. He had cameras in his office, small, hidden ones that no one would suspect. And as he watched the footage late that night, he knew his secret wasn't safe anymore. He had lived a double life for too long to let anyone tear it apart now. What started as control had turned into obsession. And now, obsession was turning into something else, something much darker. It was a humid June morning when Liona Crest's absence first raised concern. She was scheduled to meet with a boutique client to finalize a home design, something she had looked forward to for weeks. But she never showed up. At first, her client assumed she'd gotten delayed, but after several hours and no response to calls or texts, they contacted Mara Elwyn, Liona's closest friend. Mara, who spoke to Liona every single day, immediately felt something was wrong. She hadn't heard from her since the night before, and that was completely unlike her. By evening, Mara drove to Liona's apartment building, a sleek high-rise in Midtown Atlanta. She buzzed the front desk, explained the situation, and asked to check on her. The building manager hesitated but eventually agreed after confirming Liona hadn't left the building in more than 24 hours. Together, they entered her apartment. Everything looked neat, too neat. The bed was perfectly made, her makeup laid out on the dresser, and the place smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. A candle still flickered near the window, but there were signs that something wasn't right. Her phone was gone, but her purse, keys, and ID were all left behind. Mara immediately called the police. Detectives arrived within the hour and conducted a preliminary search. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, and no indication of a struggle. But they noticed something odd. Every surface looked recently wiped, as though someone had taken the time to clean the apartment thoroughly. Her laptop was missing, and so were a few notebooks she always kept on her desk. Her clothes were still in the closet, untouched, and a half-drunk glass of water sat on the nightstand. It didn't look like someone who had planned to leave. Security. Footage from the building's main entrance showed Liona arriving home 2 nights before. She had entered through the front door just after 9 p.m., but there was no footage of her leaving. It wasn't until detectives reviewed footage from the hallway on her floor that they found something disturbing. At 3:12 a.m., a man in a dark hoodie, face obscured, was seen exiting Leona's unit. He walked calmly toward the service elevator, an area with no cameras. He was carrying what appeared to be a large duffel bag, heavy and awkward in shape. That single clip was all they had. Police brought Mara in for questioning, and she provided everything she knew. She explained Leona's recent unease, how she had been distant and paranoid. She mentioned that Liona had recently found something troubling in Tarren Veldt's home. She didn't know the details, but she was sure it had shaken her. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Tarren, a man whose name until now hadn't meant much to them. A background check revealed nothing alarming. His records were clean, his finances impressive, and his public image spotless. Still, they decided to pay him a visit. When questioned, Tarren was polite but cold. He claimed he hadn't seen Liona in several days, and that their relationship had quietly ended. He even suggested she might have left town to clear her head. He denied any involvement and allowed them to search his penthouse, which appeared pristine and unremarkable. But detectives knew something felt off. His responses were too measured, too rehearsed. And then there was the absence of emotion when talking about someone he supposedly cared about. As the investigation deepened, police subpoenaed data from Leona's phone, hoping to track its last known location. The final ping came from an industrial area on the outskirts of the city, near a construction site, but nothing conclusive. Searches in that area turned up nothing. Weeks passed, and frustration grew. Without a body, the case stalled. But Mara refused to let it go. She organized search parties, posted flyers, and worked with online communities to spread awareness. Slowly, pressure built around the case. Behind closed doors, detectives began piecing together fragments of surveillance, financial records, and witness statements. One discovery caught their attention. A cleaning crew hired through a third party was paid in cash to sanitize Liona's apartment the morning after her disappearance. The order was placed under a fake name, but the payment was traced back to a burner account linked to an IP address used in Tarren's office. Now, the mask Tarren had worn so carefully for decades began to crack. Something had happened to Liona Crest inside that apartment, and whoever cleaned it had done so with disturbing precision. The man who claimed to be a savior to women was now the prime suspect in one's disappearance. But they still needed proof. Something. Undeniable. And what they didn't know was that the truth lay buried closer than anyone imagined. Investigators were running out of leads, but their suspicions were sharpening. Every trail seemed to circle back to Tarren Veldt, and though his public image remained untarnished, behind the scenes, detectives were growing increasingly certain. He was hiding something. The polished exterior, the practiced statements, and the total lack of emotional response were all red flags. They needed physical evidence, something to link him directly to Liona Crest's disappearance. That breakthrough came unexpectedly when a detective assigned to monitor Tarren's finances discovered something unusual. A large sum of money, over $15,000, had been withdrawn in cash the day after Liona was last seen. It was split into 3 separate withdrawals from 3 different bank branches within hours. That kind of behavior didn't fit Tarren's usual financial habits. Investigators traced where the cash was used, and one payment led them to a local construction supplier. The receipt showed the purchase of a large roll of industrial plastic sheeting, gloves, rope, and heavy-duty trash bags, items far outside the norm for a man like Tarren. With this new information, the police applied for a search warrant for his secondary property, a sprawling estate on the edge of the city. It was a secluded compound, surrounded by tall hedges, a security gate, and no close neighbors. The main house was elegant and expectedly spotless, but it was the small guest house, situated near the edge of the woods, that drew the attention of the forensic team. It looked unused at first glance, dust on the windows, no visible signs of activity. But when they entered, the reality was chilling. The floor was recently scrubbed. The air carried the sharp, unmistakable smell of bleach. In the bathroom, forensic experts found faint traces of blood splatter behind the toilet tank, missed during the cleanup. Swabs confirmed the blood belonged to Liona Crest. Even more disturbing were the strands of hair caught in the drain, matching her DNA. The garbage bin on the side of the building held a single latex glove, crumpled and inside out, with both Leona's and Tarren's DNA on it. Investigators were stunned. They were no longer dealing with a missing person. This was now a homicide investigation. As they searched further, they uncovered something else: a hidden compartment inside a closet in the guest house. Inside were several personal items of Leona's: her watch, a small notebook with her initials, and the same notebook Mara had told detectives she always carried. There was also a single photograph, torn in half, showing Liona standing next to Tarren in front of his penthouse. It was dated just a week before her disappearance. She had clearly tried to keep evidence of their relationship, possibly as leverage or documentation. The discoveries were damning, but still, no body had been found. That was the missing piece. Investigators believed Tarren had gone to extreme lengths to hide the evidence of the crime. But where had he hidden her? That question kept them up at night. Then came a breakthrough that changed everything. While combing through Tarren's property records, an officer noticed an unusual landscaping order placed 3 days after Liona vanished. It was for a specialty: tree delivery, a large imported weeping willow, and professional planting services. Curious, detectives visited the estate again, this time with a cadaver dog. The tree had been planted at the far end of the lawn, away from any structure. The ground beneath it looked undisturbed to the untrained eye, but the dog reacted almost immediately, circling the base and barking aggressively. They began to dig. Less than 4 feet below the surface, wrapped in layers of plastic and buried, beneath the freshly planted roots was the body of Liona Crest. She was tied at the wrists and ankles with designer belts, later confirmed to belong to Tarren. The autopsy would reveal blunt force trauma to the back of the skull and evidence of suffocation. For the detectives who had followed every fragile lead, it was a mix of relief and horror. The case was no longer a mystery. The crime had been calculated, cold, and carefully covered. But the truth had found a way to surface. Tarren Veldt had tried to bury every trace of Liona, but he had underestimated how deeply a secret can rot its way to the light. The arrest of Tarren Veldt sent shockwaves through the city. The man once admired for his philanthropy and charm was now in handcuffs, charged with the murder of a young woman he had promised to support. News channels covered the story nonstop. People who once posed beside him at charity events now distanced themselves. His reputation, so carefully built over decades, collapsed in a matter of hours. But for the investigators, the job was far from over. The arrest was only the beginning. Now they needed to uncover the full story of what had really happened. As Tarren sat in a county jail cell awaiting trial, prosecutors began to piece together the final timeline. Every detail mattered now. Forensics saw evidence from the guest house, the planted tree, and the construction purchases painted a picture of premeditation. But they needed to understand his motive. What had pushed him to kill Liona Crest? What was the secret he had worked so hard to bury? Detectives turned their attention back to the documents Liona had photographed before her death. Those images, still saved on her cloud account, were retrieved by digital forensics. The documents showed multiple aliases, passports from various countries and several women with similar profiles, young, ambitious, and all listed under aliases with emergency contacts, traced back to Tarren under different names. Most disturbing was a medical record for a woman named Sabria Tyne, who had reportedly died under suspicious circumstances in 2010. That name wasn't familiar to investigators, but the photo attached to the file bore an eerie resemblance to a woman featured in an old magazine photo with Tarren. Only back then, he went by the name Jonas Reich. Using facial recognition and cross-reference databases, law enforcement discovered at least 2 other women connected to Tarren's aliases had disappeared over the past 15 years. Neither case had led to charges, and both were classified as missing persons. With each connection, the theory strengthened. Liona wasn't his first victim. She was simply the one who got too close to the truth. Prosecutors now suspected that Tarren had created a pattern, finding vulnerable women, financially supporting them, and keeping them isolated under the illusion of love and mentorship. He manipulated them into trusting him, used them for companionship or control, and when they threatened to uncover his lies, he made them disappear. Liona, unlike the others, had found evidence. She had threatened his carefully constructed double, life, and for that, she paid with her life. Public interest in the case exploded. Online forums dissected every detail. True crime podcasts began releasing weekly episodes tracking the investigation. The term sugar daddy killer trended for days, and people began looking back at Tarren's old interviews, charity galas, and social media appearances with a sense of unease. Everything about him now seemed rehearsed and sinister. As the pre-trial hearings began, Tarren maintained his innocence. His legal team painted a picture of a successful man targeted by law enforcement and the media. They argued the evidence was circumstantial and that someone else could have planted it to frame him. But the forensic trail was too solid to ignore. DNA evidence in the guest house, the bloody traces behind the toilet, the items belonging to Liona hidden in his home. All pointed directly to him. Prosecutors also introduced Mara Elwin as a key witness. She testified about Liona's fears, the phone conversations, and her growing concern in the days leading to her disappearance. She recounted Liona's discovery of hidden documents and her intent to leave Tarren. Her testimony was emotional and powerful, painting a clear picture of a young woman caught in a web of deception. Still, Tarren showed no emotion in court. He sat with the same calm composure he had always maintained. But behind the stoic expression was a man unraveling. Surveillance footage recovered from a deleted folder on his cloud account showed him dragging the duffel bag down Liona's apartment hallway. That single video, recovered after a weeks-long digital reconstruction effort, was enough to dismantle the defense's claim of innocence. Now, with the trial date set and the full scope of Tarren's crimes coming into focus, there was only one question left. Would justice finally be served for Liona Crest, and possibly for other women lost in the shadows of his past? The trial of Tarren Veldt was one of the most watched in recent memory. Media outlets camped outside the courthouse day and night. Public interest was feverish, fueled by the chilling details that had emerged. Stories of vanished women, secret, identities, and a man who had manipulated his victims with the ease of a master puppeteer. For many, the trial was not just about one murder, but about uncovering a dark legacy hidden beneath the glittering surface of wealth and influence. The prosecution's case was built with meticulous care. Every piece of evidence, from the bloodstains in the guest house to the buried body beneath the willow tree, was presented clearly and with undeniable forensic support. The jury was shown the photos of Liona Crest's personal belongings found, hidden in the compartment, and the footage of Tarren carrying the duffel bag that would later be linked to her murder. Expert witnesses explained the psychological profile of a man like Tarren, someone who craved control and would go to terrifying lengths to protect his secrets. Throughout the trial, the courtroom was heavy with tension. Leona's mother attended. Every day, holding tightly to a framed photo of her daughter, her eyes searching for answers and justice. Mara Elwyn's testimony moved many as she described the fear and confusion Liona had endured in the days before her disappearance. The defense struggled to counter the overwhelming evidence, but tried to sow doubt by questioning the chain of custody and the reliability of surveillance footage. But it was the cross-examination of Tarren himself that shocked everyone. For the first time, the man who had always appeared so composed showed cracks in his armor. When confronted with inconsistencies in his statements, he faltered. His calm demeanor slipped, revealing glimpses of anger and desperation. Despite his attempts to maintain innocence, the weight of evidence was undeniable. As the trial reached its climax, a surprise witness came forward, a former employee of one of Tarren's companies who had remained silent out of fear for years. She testified that she had witnessed strange behaviors, secretive late-night meetings, and once saw Tarren with a woman who matched Liona's description, looking frightened and anxious. Her courage to speak up added another layer of credibility to the prosecution's narrative. Behind the scenes, the investigation continued. Detectives reopened cold cases of other women connected to Tarren's aliases. Although evidence was scarce, patterns emerged, similar circumstances, unexplained disappearances, and the same chilling control tactics. The revelation left many wondering how many lives had been touched or destroyed by the man they once admired. Finally, after weeks of intense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Tarren Veldt was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described the crime as a cold and calculated betrayal of trust, and acknowledged the bravery of those who had brought the truth to light. For Liona's family and friends, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but the pain of loss lingered heavily in the courtroom. The story of Tarren Veldt and Liona Crest became a somber reminder of how appearances can deceive. A man who had lived behind masks and lies was finally unmasked. The sugar daddy killer was no longer free to hide in the shadows. Mara continued her advocacy, working to raise awareness about the dangers of predatory relationships disguised as generosity. She launched a foundation in Leona's name to support victims of emotional manipulation and abuse, hoping to prevent others from falling prey to similar fates. In the end, the truth had shattered the illusion. The deadly secret Tarren Veldt tried to bury had been uncovered, and though it took the life of one young woman, it ensured that others would never have to suffer in silence again.